Hello, comrades! It is Drew, and welcome to Left Communism Rules, or some other name if a better group comes up. I don't know at this point. My hair looks weird because I just took a shower, so if you're wondering, yeah. So this is a new series, obviously, about the 2016 election. It's going to also be about socialism, U.S. history, the very lefty pick, sort of like Howard Zinn, if you know what that is, People's History of the U.S. But if you didn't see the announcement video, there was a brief explanation about what this is and what it will not be. It's not going to be a summary of U.S. war crimes. We'll do that. I'll be covered in another series. I'm going to try and do that. Various war crimes and imperialism will be covered, though, when it is relevant to the topic. So, like, the Iraq War will be covered. It will also mostly be an economic history, but with various social and political movements also discussed. But anyway, without further ado, let's begin. Class Wars, Episode 1. So Nixon won the election on a peace with honor platform, promising to pull out of Vietnam with honor. Okay, Zuko. Instead, however, he embarked on an escalation of the war, spreading it to Cambodia and then Laos, which most notably allowed the rise of the Khmer Rouge by, bombing millions of people and making them very desperate. This caused a genocide that killed hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people. More notable than that, in Nixon's policy, though, in terms of the U.S. history, was his China diplomacy. Nixon helped spread the doctrine of private capitalism to Mao's China. Up until this point, China was staunchly state capitalist. However, by exploiting the Sino-Soviet split that occurred a few years earlier, Nixon was able to open up Chinese workers to more foreign and domestic exploitation. This helped to create a much larger change as manufacturing firms began moving jobs over to China, where labor was super cheap compared to the US and there were less environmental and workers' rights. Nixon's visit was in 1972, and he won a resounding success in the election year against George McGovern, who only carried Massachusetts, and D.C. The reason he carried those states only is because he was running on a peace ticket, and Nixon a few years, in 72 or 71, I believe, achieved a peace deal in South Vietnam that lasted for a resounding 3 years before South Vietnam was annexed. Good job, Nixon. Good job. The year Nixon was inaugurated, however, something changed in the United States. His second inauguration, not his first one, by the way, just clear up any confusion. For the first time in a long time, the productivity rose faster than the wages, and this trend only accelerated as the years went on. I think it was like a 10% gap in 73, and then now it was like a 3% gap, and now it's like a 100 or something percent gap. It's ridiculous. From this point on, the Pax Americana, which is a reference to Pax Romana, which was the Roman peace, and Pax Americana being the American peace, began to disintegrate. Up until this point, things were relatively good as long as you were white. In the U.S., like, wages kept rising, even for black workers and people minorities. You could still expect to live a better standard of living than your parents did. That did not happen anymore. As you can see now, a lot of millennials are living in their parents' homes. So that's when the American dream really started to die. Or it wasn't ever there, though. It was always an illusion. I mean, they call it the American dream, to quote George Carlin, because you have to be asleep to believe it. The wealthy began to gather more and more resources. This trend continued, and it started really accelerating during the Reagan years, though. Nixon was impeached halfway through his presidency in a scandal known as Watergate, which, unlike Gamergate, was actually about ethics and wasn't just blowed-up issues made by a salty ex-boyfriend. He was replaced by Gerald Ford, who wasn't notable for much, other than that Saigon fell during his presidency. You ever seen a little kid who's like, and two adults are arguing, he's like, oh, the stove's on fire or something? He's like, guys, can we take it? Not now, Jimmy, we have an important conversation here. That was sort of what happened. South Vietnam was collapsed, and Vietnam was reunited under one, and Saigon was renamed Ho Chi Minh City. The Americans were kicked out, and they had to escape because the US can't defeat a country like a 40th or something of its size with 300th of its GDP. Although Jerry wasn't a very notable president because he did, like, nothing. Oh, he actually did pardon Nixon and let him get away with corruption, so that was nice. Important things did happen during his presidency, like the blight that is stagflation, which lasted from 1973 to the end of the 70s and destroyed the Keynesian order that had dominated until that point. From the Great Depression onward, it was assumed that you either had high inflation or high unemployment, and there were various strategies to handle this, which I'm not going to delve into because this isn't an economics video. Now, stagflation was special because it had high unemployment and high on inflation. This was pretty bad, and it was the worst crisis since the Great Depression until 2008. It left the capitalists scrambling for a solution to for the rest of the 70s. They eventually found the solution in neoliberalism, which will be further discussed in episode 2. The 70s also saw tremendous social progress for various minority groups. This was haunted by a coming storm. So a lot of these groups speaking about their oppression, you know, and most of them were inspired by the civil rights movement. Things like the Alcatraz occupation for Native Americans and which they claimed as Indian land. Alcatraz, by the way, for non-Americans, was a big prison that was abandoned. They had Al Capone in there, thrown in there, various big-time criminals. The Black Panthers were for black liberation. There was even an entire rainbow coalition with various other groups. Like, there was an Appalachian American group, I forget their name. But they wore Confederate flags that were socialist. It was weird. You can look that up. There was also Aztlan for the Chicanos. Chicanx, how do you pronounce that, by the way, the gender-neutral term? And anyone want to correct me on that? Please do. The gay rights movement was also kicked off during this period with the Stonewall riots. Although that took place in 1969, it was continued throughout the rest of the 70s. But the most important for the canary in the coal mine that we're about to discuss was second wave feminism. So after first wave feminism, which sort of died out after the whole suffragette thing and women got the right to vote, second wave feminism kicked off in the 60s and was started by a lot of discontents with the 50s suburban dystopia where women were very subjugated and were basically, you know, men's assistants. However, it really got its start with Betty Friedan's the Feminine Mystique, which was a book. The movement had a grand push, however, and it was the Equal Rights Amendment, or ERA. The ERA was an amendment which, by the way, is somewhat controversial around feminists, as working class feminists oppose it. But the dispute among feminists about it is irrelevant to why the reaction against it was bad from the right. So if you want to look into why there was a debate over that, you can in your own time. I'm not going to go into it too much depth here. It was an amendment that would have given women equal right to men as a government. Most constitutions in the world have women's rights in them. I don't think the U.S. does. And it looked like it was about to be ratified, honestly. It had support from both major political parties, and it only needed 3 more states. It was at 35 of 38, I believe, which is, I think, the 2/3 majority required to pass the constitutional amendment. However, a conservative backlash was growing in white suburban America. All these reactionary elements, which had been pushed down for a decade or two by, you know, actual social progress and change, were manifesting themselves, and in a disgusting, vile woman named Phyllis Schlafly. If you want a good metaphor, she was sort of like the Milo, you needs to shut the fuck up. That's his last name, I think. She was very vocal against the ERA and had a lot of family groups coalesce around her to stop evil things like unisex bathrooms. Why do conservatives always make bathrooms a sexual experience, by the way, though? Like, who wants to go to the bathroom? I just want to pee or take a shit. Come on. So the backlash was the canary in the coal mine for the oncoming neo-reactionary storm about to come. And as we shall see in the next episode, things get very, very dark very, very quickly for anyone that wasn't white, straight, male, and at least somewhat well off.